The girl just sighed as she ate spicy rabbit head. It's nice to be a little rabbit. There's no need to wipe your behind after peeing. Unexpectedly, the next second she turned into a fluffy rabbit. In front of her was a lively young woman who said she wanted to adopt her while being immersed in beauty. Suddenly, a large black snake leapt from the forest in front of her. The young woman screamed and threw it away upon seeing the jaws approaching closer and closer. The protagonist rabbit opened her eyes in surprise and fainted. She didn't know how much time had passed. The protagonist rabbit opened her eyes and unconsciously looked around. Aside from the smell of the large trees, there was nothing but the intense blue sky. At that moment, some fragmented memories appeared in her brain, the size of a walnut. It was the fantasy novel she had read before. That lively young woman was the heroine of the book, Tin Chow. Just as she was thinking, something heavy suddenly fell from the sky, falling right in front of her. The protagonist rabbit was startled and immediately jumped. There lay a large wounded wolf on the ground. The protagonist rabbit blinked. This seemed to be the young master of the wolf clan, Hun Kui, from the book, the faithful dog substitute for the protagonist. But in the plot, he was directly sent flying toward the protagonist. How come he's in front of her now? However, the leader of the wolf clan in the book is quite sentimental. If she had saved him, maybe he would pick her transformation herbs. Isn't that free labor? The protagonist rabbit felt happier thinking about it. She jumped forward again. The sweet blood scent that came off him would surely attract other dangerous animals. She had to take him quickly. With her hind legs slightly charged with energy, she leaped forward like a projectile. Hun Kui rolled forward about 10 centimeters. Fortunately, Junie was still not an adult wolf pup. Otherwise, there was no way she could have moved him. But the size difference between a rabbit and a wolf was really too big. She hadn't even made a few hits. The protagonist rabbit was out of breath. The entire rabbit collapsed on the ground. She looked back. She had only walked about 2 meters. Her vision darkened momentarily. She was really going to catch up to the rabbit. She rested for about a quarter of an hour. The protagonist rabbit felt she had recovered enough. She went back to exercising. When she finally brought Junie to the entrance of her burrow, the daylight had already darkened. The wounds on her companion's body were slowly healing, so the protagonist rabbit didn't have to worry about him or whether his injuries would get infected or anything like that. After doing everything, the protagonist rabbit felt more and more tired. Although rabbits are nocturnal and sleep during the day, she was still human inside. She didn't want to lie on this ground. She looked up and observed the broad back of this wolf. She remained silent for a moment. Then, determined, she jumped with force onto JNQI's back. Afterward, with disdain, she shook the dirt off her fur. And, after a yawn, she fell into a deep sleep. Early in the morning, the protagonist rabbit was awakened by hunger. It was hard for her to open her eyes. Her fur no longer had its shine. The rabbit looked very weak. JNQI had not yet woken up. The protagonist rabbit went out and took a look. She discovered that the wounds on his body were almost healed. She couldn't help but feel envious of his powerful self-healing ability. After leaving the hole, she jumped following the route she remembered. Although her stomach was still empty, she was used to drinking a little water before meals. Not far from the rabbit's burrow, there was a river. She jumped into the water every night. She drank several times until she felt satisfied. Nearby, there was an area of fresh green grass. She bent down and smelled it. A fragrance of fresh grass enveloped her. The protagonist rabbit carefully opened her mouth and ate a sprout of grass. She found that the taste was quite pleasant. The grass didn't taste bitter. On the contrary, it had a slight sweetness. When she had eaten enough, she prepared to return. Suddenly, she thought of the wolf she had in her nest. The protagonist rabbit took one more large leaf. She folded it into a shallow arc. She crouched down and took some water. She jumped back to the entrance of the cave. The water was almost as good as wine. The anti-hero, the young master of the wolf clan, was still asleep. The protagonist rabbit approached his mouth. She slowly poured the water from the leaves into his mouth. The anti-hero, the young master of the wolf clan, suddenly let out a faint sigh. The protagonist rabbit thought he was going to wake up. She crouched in front of him, staring for a moment. The other person had his eyes closed. He showed no reaction. The protagonist rabbit decided to jump back onto his back. Her mind reflected on the life of a rabbit. Thinking about that, she fell back to sleep. It hadn't been long since she fell asleep, and he, the anti-hero, struggled to open his eyes. A muffled sound came from his throat. "Where am I?" He felt something stuck to his back, small and warm. Something was breathing slowly on his back. He moved his nose and sniffed a familiar smell. It was the breath he had sensed vaguely earlier. It seemed like someone had been giving him a drink. He moved slightly. It seemed like he felt the animal beneath him move. The protagonist rabbit stroked the other's fur a bit. She rubbed her head against him, then fell back into a deep sleep. Junie furrowed his brow and turned his head. Was I saved by a little rabbit? Maybe Junie's gaze was more intense than it appeared. When he opened his eyes, WN saw ahead. 2 dim green lights were glowing. Junie wanted to speak, but what reached WN's ears was a howl. The protagonist rabbit felt a little scared, looking at the other's dim gaze, and also his increasingly irritable expression. Her heart couldn't help but tremble. This guy shouldn't be amnesiac. She remembered the original plot. Hun Kui, being amnesiac, had no security and wasn't aggressive. That's why the protagonist had worried about him. He didn't have the aura of a female protagonist and was still being treated like this. Well. Wounded, can't even speak. Junie was a bit irritated. His heart felt uncomfortable, and he shouted at WN once again. Come, little rabbit! The protagonist rabbit seemed to understand his meaning. I'm serving him as food. The anti-hero stared at this small lump in front of him because he had been with himself all night. So her body had also absorbed a little of his scent. The protagonist rabbit felt uneasy standing in front of him. She didn't know what he was trying to do. Junie lazily lay down and greeted her with his paw. The protagonist rabbit jumped excitedly to approach. The anti-hero extended his right front paw. The protagonist rabbit thought he was going to grab her. She quickly stopped, trying to turn around and escape. But it was already too late. Junie's claws had already grabbed her head. Only one thought remained in her mind. How foolish I am. The anti-hero used a bit of his remaining spiritual energy. He investigated the memories of his opponent. Then he saw a small white rabbit covered in snow, jumping and hopping, making a gray wolf roll forward. It stopped for a moment, then moved. Those short little legs were hopping. For some reason, I found it a bit adorable. His expression was complicated. He never imagined he'd see such a scene. At the same time, he also perceived a strong voice in his heart. Transformation herb. Transformation herb. Transformation herb. He couldn't help but admire how smart this little rabbit was. She knew that the transformation herb could give her, a common demon beast, the ability to gain wisdom and become human. The protagonist rabbit realized that nothing had happened to her and became braver. The other's claws grabbing her head were actually quite comfortable. JNQI released his claws. He made a slight sound from his throat, as if promising something. The protagonist rabbit tilted her head, as if she understood what the other wanted to say. She softly made some chewing sounds. Little rabbit, you saved me. As thanks, I'll pick you a transformation herb. A deep male voice sounded in the protagonist rabbit's ear. WN immediately raised her head. She realized that JNQI's mouth hadn't moved at all. Who said those words just now? Am I hearing things? JNQI narrowed his eyes in dissatisfaction. He felt that this rabbit in front of him really didn't seem like an ordinary rabbit. If he hadn't investigated her lineage earlier, he would certainly think she was a demon beast. JNQ, I murmured softly, as if warning something. The protagonist rabbit tilted her head. What's he saying? JNQ. I saw the brief confusion in WN's eyes. That confusion turned into silence. He forgot she was a little rabbit and not a wolf pup. She didn't understand what he was saying. A wolf and a rabbit stared at each other. The protagonist rabbit felt that if she moved slightly, the hairs on her side would brush against the other's nose. Suddenly, JNQI's stomach made a sound. It broke the atmosphere between the two. It turned out that he was hungry. The protagonist rabbit realized this. She immediately stood up. Holding a piece of grass, she gently tapped JNQI's lips. Then she jumped one step back. In 2 or 3 bites, the grass was devoured. Then, with her front paws, she pointed outward. Afterward, she gave JNQI's stomach another gentle tap. If she wasn't mistaken, this little rabbit wanted to look for food for itself. Just as JNQI was distracted, the protagonist rabbit misunderstood his intention. After all, she remembered the original plot. JNQI was quite a proud wolf. He never said what he really wanted. The chubby body of the protagonist rabbit moved immediately. Jumping, she ran outside. When he reacted, the rabbit's fur had already disappeared. Junie was stunned. He felt confused. That silly rabbit really wanted to find food for him. The main rabbit protagonist hopped a few steps outside. Suddenly, I thought of a question. The digestive system of wolves cannot process plant-based food. Therefore, they can only eat meat. The main rabbit protagonist looked down at her limbs. Her head strained to remember things related to wolves, especially about food. Moose, sheep, rabbits. The main rabbit protagonist trembled involuntarily. She blinked several times and suddenly remembered a type of animal. She searched for a spot near the drain and began to dig. She used her hind legs for support. Her front paws dug rapidly. Suddenly, the main rabbit protagonist stopped. She felt her claws being touched by something slippery. Something seemed to be tangled. She quickly hid back underground, her shadow no longer visible. They were still somewhat soft. The main rabbit protagonist didn't think much. She directly extended her paw to take a look. Why is this worm so disgusting? The main rabbit protagonist, frightened, immediately let go of it, crying and touching her paws. That slippery feeling still seemed to linger as she immediately felt a chill. It's so scary. That worm was almost as thick as her front paws. After the rabbit threw it, a tremor shook her body several times. She quickly disappeared back underground, no longer visible. Only a fly-sized hole remained on the ground. The main rabbit protagonist covered her stomach. She decided to eat some fresh leaves to calm herself. This time, she ate a very large leaf. But when she ate it, it had a sour-sweet taste. After eating, she gathered her courage again. She searched for the biggest leaf she had seen so far. Anxiously, she headed toward the trench. When the daylight began to fade, the main rabbit protagonist returned, covered in mud. Her black and white fur was dirty and messy. She had something in her mouth. At the moment she entered the hole, the anti-hero, young master of the wolf clan, noticed. He opened his eyes. Seeing the main rabbit protagonist so dusty, a look of complexity passed through his eyes. Why was this little rabbit so nice to him? Did she know that he could give her transformation grass? But he always had the feeling that this little rabbit shouldn't be so intelligent. The main rabbit protagonist had no idea what he was thinking. Those long and slippery things were really fascinating. The worms were cut into segments. From her perspective, it was like an enlarged version of a worm. Junie felt a little confused upon seeing her dazed look. What could this rabbit have experienced outside? WN pushed the bag of worms toward him, and I found a corner and sat there. Junie looked inside. He froze for a moment. Had the young master of the wolf clan really fallen so low? The worms didn't care about the complex feelings of wolves and rabbits. Turning their bodies, they suddenly disappeared into the mud. When WN managed to calm her mind, when I turned around, I saw the stupid look on Junie's face. She tilted her head and hopped toward Junie. Bravely, she extended her tongue and licked his face. Junie barely reacted and saw this little rabbit licking his face. In that gentle gesture, he could feel the reassuring meaning of lotuses. It was a very wonderful feeling. Since he was little, he had only been petted by his mother. In such an intimate way, he blushed shyly, his gaze shifted. This little rabbit was even licking him. This was really too cheeky. The main rabbit protagonist could clearly feel JNQI, that emotion that was slowly calming down. She didn't know why, but deep down she felt happy. Even though the other was a fierce beast, it was still very pleasant that she was rubbing against him like that. Go, JNQI, softly called, extending his paw and pushing the main rabbit protagonist a few steps back. His eyes looked around, but they didn't look at her. The main rabbit protagonist looked up, a bit confused. What could this clumsy wolf be thinking? Junie patted her head with his paw. The rabbit listened. She retracted her claws. I heard that sound again. It turns out those are Junie's words. WN stayed stunned for a moment before slowly reacting. She thought she was hallucinating again. Stay well. When I recover, I'll take you to find transformation grass. After exhausting his spiritual power, he became lazy. He withdrew his claws. WN couldn't help but open her mouth. How did this wolf know she was looking for transformation grass? Since she became a rabbit, she felt her mind had become much duller. There was no adult intelligence at all. After Junie said that, he shrank and continued to recover his spiritual power with his eyes closed. Now, WN had that phrase in mind that would help her gather transformation grass. This is simply great. Indeed, the effort of these 2 days wasn't in vain. She happily raised her 2 paws to hold her face. She had already begun imagining herself. What should she do after becoming human? A week had passed since Junie said those words. Not only psychologically, but she also perfectly adapted to her rabbit identity physically. Her movements when eating grass were becoming more and more skilled. For the first time, she realized that the grass had different flavors. However, there was one thing WNWN found quite good. It was simply pooping. Rabbit droppings are little balls. They're still dry. She doesn't need to wash her butt or anything. These days, she also dared to go. She looked a little further. On the way, she didn't encounter any fierce beasts. She only encountered squirrels and birds that were as weak as her. That day, WWN had just patrolled her territory. When returning to the cave, just when she wanted to close her eyes and rest, Junie suddenly opened his eyes without warning. The bright light in his eyes scared her so much that she froze on the ground. What was happening? What had happened again? WNWN suddenly felt a bad premonition in her heart, but she had just been scared by Junie. Her mind was blank with fear. She couldn't think of anything. Junie was completely bristling. Just now, he detected a familiar fragrance. Rotten and cold. That's the smell of a stinky python. Remember, he had already eaten that stinky snake, right? He sniffed several times and immediately understood. It was the lapdog of that stinky snake coming to seek revenge. A fierce look flashed in Junie's eyes. If it weren't for the fact that his spiritual energy was now diminished, those little adorable creatures could have been eliminated with a single swipe of his paw. At that moment, even the main rabbit protagonist understood, because she also felt that dangerous atmosphere. Although she didn't know where the danger was coming from right now, there was something she clearly understood, and that was that only Junie could protect her little life. She quickly hopped a few steps and planted herself in front of Junie. Then, with a big jump, she climbed onto his back. Her limbs clung tightly to his neck. "Help, this handsome wolf. Please protect me. I am your savior, rabbit." Although the main rabbit protagonist couldn't speak, Junie understood almost all her movements. Incredibly, he could understand almost all of them. He kept thinking about how to get rid of those stinky snakes. But with all the commotion the rabbit made, he couldn't think of anything. Junie blinked slightly. He almost forgot that there was a little rabbit. Since he couldn't face them directly, he had no choice but to flee. He, expressionless, didn't push. The main rabbit protagonist tugged at his neck. This rabbit really had a lot of strength. It left his neck sore. Honey didn't care if the other could understand. First, he gave a low howl to the main rabbit protagonist. Seeing she was still dazed, he suddenly felt a wave of helplessness in his heart. The main rabbit protagonist blinked several times. With a jump full of energy, she leaped onto his back. The whole rabbit stuck to his neck again. The next second, Junie was surrounded by a bright green glow. He charged directly towards the thinnest part of the snake's wall. The spicy bar circle was immediately opened. Honey's speed was very fast, and he didn't like to fight. His body emitted a faint light constantly. Those snakes, when touching this light, emitted a crackling sound. Then there was only a pool of black water. With the help of the light, he quickly took the main rabbit protagonist out of the encirclement, running at the fastest speed of his life. The crowd of snakes behind kept chasing relentlessly. At that moment, the main rabbit protagonist regained her senses after the panic. Finally, she remembered something very important. This forest is called the fairy forest. The fairy forest is roughly divided into 4 spheres of influence. One of the owners of an area is a countryman. He likes peace. Whenever you enter there, he will protect you so that you are safe and carefree. The main rabbit protagonist thought about looking up and looking around. But unfortunately, Junie's speed was too fast. She couldn't see where she was at all. With the sound of the snakes slithering behind her, as well as the hissing they emitted, these sounds felt closer and closer. The main rabbit protagonist could only quickly turn her little brain the size of a walnut. At that moment, the bright moon in the sky illuminated her view. She briefly calculated the current time. Then, she determined exactly where she was based on the position of the light. The main rabbit protagonist held onto Junie tightly with her limbs, fearing that he might throw her off. Then, tentatively, she released one of her front paws and gave a soft pat to Honey. "You've missed the direction. We need to go left quickly." Honey didn't dare to slacken for a moment. The spiritual energy recovered in 7 days had almost been exhausted by him. That's why he hadn't healed his own injuries. Along the way, there were more and more traces of sweet blood. This undoubtedly clearly signaled the direction to the snake. "This really can't be," the main rabbit protagonist screamed internally. "We should take advantage of the chance to survive." Her short front paws hit Junie hard. She signaled him to change direction and run fast. But it was evident that now the two of them were not on the same brainwave frequency. Is he arrogant? She didn't know how long they had run. Junie suddenly stopped and howled at the sky. Then he looked at the main rabbit protagonist, asking, "What time is it? This little rabbit is still causing trouble for me." The main rabbit protagonist realized that he had stopped. She quickly hopped forward, forcefully pointing to the left. However, Honey didn't pay attention at all. To him, what could a little rabbit understand? He turned his head and, without gentleness, gave the main rabbit protagonist a push with his snout. It's true, a common rabbit. In this situation, how could they not be afraid? The rabbit also needs comfort now, right? The force was so strong that it seemed like he was going to decapitate himself. The mouth and nose of the protagonist bunny. Her whole bunny was about to be suffocated. The protagonist bunny suddenly saw stars. However, she kept pointing to the left. She also had a very anxious expression. The anti-hero finally understood that this little bunny wanted to say something. This was for him to go in that direction. "Do you want me to run over there?" Junie's voice resonated in the protagonist bunny's mind. The protagonist bunny raised her head, confused. Immediately, tears appeared in her eyes. My God, this brother finally understood what I was saying. The protagonist bunny nodded quickly. It was that Junie didn't understand her intention. The force was so intense that it seemed like his head was going to explode. Junie looked in the direction where the bunny was pointing. "Over there! What place is that?" At that moment, a large mass of dark snakes approached from behind. Junie clenched his rear jaw. At this moment, there was no choice but to trust the bunny. He quickly picked up WNWN and ran in the direction she was pointing. He headed toward the indicated direction. WNWN continued trying to remember if there was a nearby path. He did everything he could to think if there was a nearby route. The wolf under the brake suddenly was startled and quickly looked up. He found that, at some point, a large snake had appeared in front of her. Its eyes, like lanterns, stared at her. "Huni, you escaped before. This time I must definitely take you to sacrifice to my older brother." The large snake, after saying this, let out a disdainful laugh. It casually moved its tail and struck forward. In an instant, a long and thick crack appeared in that place. Van Wan's heart trembled with the crack. The anti-hero, young master of the wolf clan, calmly looked at the black snake with his head held high. In the next second, he suddenly took the protagonist bunny in his teeth. The she-wolf rushed forward like a sharp ray. She used the only spiritual energy left in front of her. She formed a huge arc like a curved sword. She directed it straight toward the black snake. The black snake felt disoriented by this movement. Her first reaction was to dodge. The anti-hero, seeing this, did not stop his steps. With a full effort, he disappeared instantly. The black snake soon realized it had been tricked. Then, furious, she concentrated her spiritual energy and followed him. The anti-hero had not run far when his body was thrown by a robust tail. He crashed directly into the root of a large tree. The protagonist bunny felt like she was flying. Her body involuntarily spun several times in the air. She then fell headfirst into a nearby bush. Her limbs twisted several times. The black snake looked at Junie with a cold gaze. The protagonist bunny had already been automatically filtered by him. Does she dare to mock me? Is she really looking for trouble? The black snake opened its mouth, revealing its terrifying fangs. Twisting its slippery body, it quickly bit toward Junie. The protagonist bunny had barely pulled her head out of the bush. Then she saw such a terrifying scene. This is danger. At the moment when the black snake's fangs sank into Junie's flesh, an aura of authority threw him into the air. Then, a soft voice resonated. Who dares here? Yes. The protagonist bunny, upon seeing the owner of that voice, immediately became excited. At the same time, she sighed in relief. She and Junie are finally safe. A faint shadow appeared not far away. He was completely covered in snow. He looked somewhat like a white lion, only he had horns on his head and a goat-like beard. His eyes showed a faint golden glow that commanded without needing anger. He frowned upon seeing Junie, filled with wounds, within his protection area. How dare these demonic beasts be so open in their affection? And moreover, he was from the dark snake family. He moved his hand gently. The black snake's body trembled. Suddenly, several large holes appeared in the snake's body. The green marks looked viscous and wondrous. The protagonist bunny once again felt that her sense of smell was too sensitive, which wasn't good. That unpleasant smell almost made her faint. The black snake opened its eyes, its voice weak and frightened. "Lord Bice, have mercy. I didn't mean to break your rules. It's just that this young master of the wolf clan kissed my older brother. I just want to take revenge. Bei's eyes glowed with a faint golden light. No matter the reason. In my territory, you must follow the rules. The black snake looked at Junie and WN with disdain upon hearing that. It twisted and quickly slithered away. WN quickly jumped to Junie's side. He gently pushed him with his snout, wiping off the sugar marks. Junie had a somewhat lost look. She felt WN's comfort. She didn't think too much about it. She brought her head closer to WN. She also gently pressed her snout against WN. Bei saw that the black snake had left. WN looked toward where the protagonist Bunny and JNQI were. A flash of surprise crossed his eyes. Judging by his gaze, this wolf and this bunny are kissing each other. Since when do wolves and bunnies have such a good relationship? Aren't bunnies supposed to always be the wolves' reserve food? At that moment, JNQI's thoughts also reached his ears. This bunny is really soft, like the touch of a mother. He let out a faint laugh, immediately finding the situation interesting. All right. Are you done kissing? The protagonist bunny gave Junie a swat on the mouth, stopping the other from wanting to continue this action. With the other paw, she gently petted JNQI's head. Well, now we should find a place to rest well. You have injuries after all. Don't be so clingy, darling. WN now considers himself an older sister. He saw that the other's gaze was becoming more serious. His breathing was no longer as weak as before. He was hopping and jumping to the side. He urged him to get up quickly. Junie indeed got up, trembling. He lowered his head to look at the protagonist bunny. The protagonist bunny also lifted her head to look at him. Junie's eyes softened a lot. He bent down and licked the fur of the protagonist bunny. Then, he took her by the neck. He gently placed her on his back. Then, he began to walk, limping into the depths of the forest. He had barely walked a little when he found a small cave. Junie finally ran out of strength. And he also made the protagonist bunny fall. When the protagonist bunny peeked to look, she realized that he was already unconscious. The protagonist bunny blinked. Suddenly, she felt a strong sense of responsibility. It seemed that before becoming human, raising a wolf and preparing her own game was essential. She jumped toward that small cave. She moved her nose but didn't sniff out any other suspicious objects. It seems like it doesn't have an owner. The protagonist bunny nodded contentedly. From now on, this cave belongs to her, the protagonist bunny. The amount of sugar in JNQI's body is really too much. After pushing him into the hole, the protagonist bunny realized this. That thick sweetness had stuck to his fur. In clumps, it had tangled up. Looking at those stains, the protagonist bunny instinctively sniffed. That smell almost made her vomit. No, I need to shower. But it's okay to leave JNQI alone here. The protagonist bunny looked at the disheveled appearance of JNQI, which had changed much more than when she first saw him. A thin skeleton. It looks like he needs more food. As soon as she thinks of food, the protagonist bunny's mind starts to wander. After all, it's difficult for a vegetarian and a carnivore to stay together. There are many things to consider. She, as a bunny, doesn't know how to hunt. And now, he is unwilling to eat worms. The protagonist bunny feels a little depressed. Suddenly, she remembered those pieces of black snake that were knocked down by CES. After thinking it through, the protagonist bunny prepared to move. After a night of escaping, she now felt energized. She showed no signs of tiredness at all. The frequency of jumping on her short legs also increased. A whitish hue begins to appear in the distant sky. The protagonist bunny quickly found the original place. As soon as she approached that pile of meat, the protagonist bunny felt a churn in her stomach, or even in her past life she had never suffered such injustice. It really smells horrible, especially for bunnies with excellent senses of smell. It's a disaster. She could only encourage herself inwardly. She searched for a very large leaf to wrap a large piece of meat. She wrapped it with a thin twig and dragged it slowly back. On the way back, the protagonist bunny passed by a small, shallow river. The water in the river was clear and barely covered her legs. Suddenly, the protagonist bunny's legs stopped moving. She sniffed the smell on her body. Wow, it smells like sweet blood, as if she was submerged in syrup. What if I wash first? Anyway, it won't take much time. The protagonist bunny's red eyes stared intently at the river water. About 3 seconds later, she made a decision. A bunny with messy fur. a small bunny covered in a lot of sugary dirt. Decisively, she dropped the meat she was dragging in place. Hopping and jumping, she headed toward the riverbank. After bathing, the protagonist bunny involuntarily shook herself. She got rid of almost all the water on her body. Then, slowly, she returned hopping with the bag of meat. On the way, she also took care of her feeding. She ate some leaves at random. When she returned to the cave, the daylight had already illuminated everything. Junie was still unconscious, lying there. He only had a weak breath left. She was the first to see Hunku's wound. Apart from the place where the large black snake had bitten him, the rest of the small wounds had almost healed. Junie suddenly let out a muffled groan. His body trembled slightly, as if he had seen something terrifying. What happened? The protagonist bunny was scared. Junie's reaction was like someone who had been poisoned. Only returning to his original form would cure it. Junie suddenly opened his eyes. His cold eyes stared at the protagonist bunny, without any emotion, as if he was about to swallow her. The protagonist bunny was so scared that she fell to the ground. She didn't even dare to move. Fortunately, Honey didn't make any other move. He stared at her for a moment and then closed his eyes, as if falling asleep. The protagonist bunny didn't dare move either, tentatively stretching her limbs. Seeing that Junie didn't react, she gathered courage and hopped a few more steps. She realized he was still the same. She let out a slight sigh of relief. She turned around and went out to drag the meat. After finishing, a wave of sleepiness invaded her. The protagonist bunny blinked. Immediately, a scene of mist appeared before her, so she decided not to think about it anymore. She climbed under Junie's abdomen and comfortably fell asleep. The wolf and the bunny cuddled together like this. It had been a long day. Nguyen woke up from hunger in her stomach. She slowly crawled out from under JNQI. She looked up, and the stars were already hanging in the sky. Manhwa sat dazedly on the ground. Her eyes reflected confusion. What time is it? After a long while, she finally woke up. She planned to fill her stomach first. She didn't dare walk recklessly through the nocturnal forest, so she only dared to search for grass near the cave entrance. Manhwa began to eat grass, her mind wandering. She didn't know when JNQI might wake from this wound. Just in case, he remained unconscious due to severe injuries. What would she do if it took him 10 or more years to recover? By then, she would have already disappeared, right? After all, rabbits can only live for 6 to 10 years. No. She must make Junie wake up quickly. She is still waiting to become human. Suddenly, Van Wayne thought of if she knew. The other party was not just a good person known. She was also omniscient. So if she knew, she should be the best to communicate with her. Van Wayne suddenly became excited. If Hunan doesn't wake up tomorrow, she will go find Sinisi. She finished her food. Van Wayne bounced back. She skillfully pierced Junie's abdomen. After resting for a while, she thought dizzily. From the movement, it seemed like Junie was hugging her while asleep. Both were extremely intimate. She had never experienced this in her past life. She had never been hugged like this by someone with a different surname. Due to certain personal reasons, Van Wayne didn't want to think about these kinds of things, nor did he want to touch it. Fortunately, JNQI is not in human form right now. How can intimacy between animals be considered intimacy? It's not the mating season. Nguyen suddenly thought of a terrifying issue. Rabbits are a species that go into heat very frequently. If the mating season comes at that moment, what should be done? Should I really look for a male rabbit? But male rabbits all seem to look the same. I don't know if it's handsome or not. Manhwa felt herself getting a little hot. Becoming human is urgent. Meanwhile, Wuhan was next to JNQI, thinking about many things. Outside, the moon had already changed without him realizing. At that time, Wuhan went out to dig a small hole for himself to use as a bath. Once he finished, he filled the hole. Those short little legs lifted the dirt. Throughout the day, JNQI still showed no signs of awakening. The main little rabbit was on a sunny, pleasant day, holding that meat that was somewhat spoiled in some parts. Gently, she kissed Junie's forehead. Sister left. Sister went to find you a treating doctor. Before leaving, she wrote a few words on the ground. Wait for her return. She only wrote in simplified characters. I don't know if the other person will understand these words. She also intentionally took a piece of black snake meat. The main little rabbit walked, suffering from the smell, because she was carrying that piece of black snake meat. All the way, the smell of that meat was intimidating. No animal dared to mess with it. After a day and a night of travel, The main little rabbit finally reached her destination on the morning of the third day, holding that piece of meat that was somewhat spoiled near the large lake under a dense banyan tree. Before leaving, she also left a mark. In front of the lake with sparkling water, the main little rabbit stood at the water's edge and called out strongly from her heart. Mr. Valls, after calling, she waited silently for a moment. A chirp was heard in her head. The little rabbit slightly lifted her head. It was a white bird. Except for its slightly red beak, it flew slowly to a tree. It raised its proud head and looked at the little rabbit. The little rabbit gave it a couple of looks, then ignored it. She turned her head and continued calling out to the surface of the lake. A white shadow suddenly appeared in front of her. "What matter do I have?" "Yes." A slight laugh escaped, looking at Bangwan with gentle eyes. "Yes," said Tianren. At the moment when the little rabbit saw the other, she felt her heart calm down. "I have a friend who is seriously injured. I beg you to go see him soon." "Is that the gray wolf?" Yes, it's him. Normally, he can wake up quickly, but now he has been unconscious for several days. I'm very worried about him." At that moment, the little bird suddenly flew from the tree branch. It flew around Cisei's shadow, chirping cheerfully a few times. Then, it also said a few other things. Bai shook his head in resignation. "Bai, Leon. Don't speak lightly just because the other person doesn't understand your words." The main little rabbit looked on with a completely confused expression. "What is that bird babbling about?" The little bird chirped several times. If it were this little rabbit, there wouldn't be a problem. But there's the young master of the wolf tribe. Don't you know what kind of character he has? He only has a somewhat annoying personality, and he hasn't done anything inappropriate to innocent people. Moreover, there are few things here that can awaken his interest. Worried about. Sylvian was clearly very angry. His wings flapped faster. "Earlier, I firmly opposed you taking in the black snake family. But what was the result? This time, you really should listen to me. Cylindilian is a little bird that was saved a long time ago. At that time, there were very few creatures in the world, so he decided to keep him as a companion. The only flaw was that he hadn't learned to speak like humans, but Sissy didn't think it was a problem. As long as he could understand it, it was fine. The two were like the closest of friends. They spent a lot of time together. Mengwan watched Sensei and the little bird. Their conversation started to deviate into everyday matters. She thought it was a little funny. These two, 1 second ago, were saying no. "Not like this, please, not like this." The next second, it turned into, "Your feathers are looking more beautiful lately." Or, "If we keep going like this, when will we be able to save JNQI again?" Yes, I know. Upon hearing Mengwan's thoughts, she kept her smile. "Little rabbit, you don't need to worry anymore. Your friend is fine, nothing happened to him. Look, he's coming here." The little rabbit still hadn't asked what that phrase meant. Suddenly, a strong wind blew from behind. "Collect it." He didn't arrive here quickly. Then, it fell on the wolf's back. The fat of his body trembled slightly. The rabbit still looked very confused. This wolf and this rabbit worked together with great coordination. Sinisi, standing, laughed as he measured them. "Now, do you still think they can't be here?" The wolf shot a glance at the little rabbit. His eyes reflected surprise and slight displeasure. "Little rabbit, don't stay still. Because you run around aimlessly, and you're carrying that stinky snake meat. It smells good and refreshing." Upon waking, he realized that the little rabbit's breath was very faint. The other person wasn't beside him, and there were many strange traces on the ground. This made him panic immediately. He thought something had happened to Mengwan, so he followed those traces, running non-stop all the way. However, Mengwan wasn't so complicated. The moment she saw JNQI, she tickled his nose. She suddenly bent down and hugged him tightly with her limbs. Her head floated over the wolf's back. "How great, JNQI! How great that you're fine!" In reality, her feelings for JMQI were a little complicated. It was almost like the story of chicks. "In this world, I only know you." JNQI was surprised by Mengwan's sudden affection. He coughed a little in discomfort. This little rabbit is really too direct in expressing her feelings. It was at that moment that JNQI realized he had left those two white creatures in the corner. He raised his eyebrows and began to greet them. "Bye." Van Wan stood dazed for a moment. "Can you really speak?" Vice let out a small laugh. The young leader of the wolf pack, Junie, "When did you become so desolate?" Junie squinted. "I feel a little annoyed inside. It's none of your business." As soon as he said that, Sisyeon hadn't said anything. His companion Silmarillion could no longer contain himself. He glared at Junie with fury and shouted several times. It was obvious that he was insulting. Van Wan, feeling uncomfortable, covered her ears. Resistance reflected in her little figure. This is simply deafening noise. Although Cillian couldn't speak like humans, Honey understood what she said. His expression didn't change at all. How credible can what a broken bird says be? Besides, this bird seems a little silly. It's not comparable at all to your little rabbit. Vice heard Honey's thoughts. A flash of surprise crossed his gaze. Junie ignored Sensei and Cillian's ramblings. He turned his head and gently pushed Bangwan. Come on, little rabbit. I think you can understand what I'm saying, right? The little rabbit blinked and looked into Junie's eyes. He seemed silly. After a long while, she felt. Junie was clearly very happy. He waved goodbye to Vice. Without waiting for the other's reaction, he had already left with a leap. What a rude type. Lord, if so, you should teach him a lesson. Bai looked in the direction where Junie had left. A flash of amusement crossed his gaze. It's fine, Cillian. It's not the first time you've seen this expression in him. If you keep saying that, be careful, that wolf might come to bite you. Vice realized that, regarding Hun and Ivan Huang, it became even more interesting. Could it be that the wolf prince still likes that little rabbit? It can't be. Maybe I should observe a little longer. By the way, call his father, Honey, to watch the good show. This time, when Junie ran, he even knew to protect Bangwan. Bangwan didn't feel the wind chasing her at all. She was sitting upright on Junie's back. It was like being on a high-speed train, like a flying train. Suddenly, she frowned. She quickly patted Junie to indicate he should stop. Did Junie really stop? Van Wassian pointed to a lake not far away. Would you like to take a bath? He followed the direction of Van Wan's arm with his gaze. She saw a clear river. Van Wan seized the opportunity. Her two chubby front paws floated some of Junie's hair. Then, with an effort, she took it all out. Junie trembled slightly. He was about to tell Van Wan not to make a noise. Van Wan gently lifted some hair with her paws and pushed those strands toward her nose. Junie immediately understood. He half opened his eyes, his tone hostile. Do you despise me? Bangwan didn't react. She simply stubbornly stared into his eyes. Then, one of her front paws pointed toward the river they were near. Seeing that Junie still hadn't moved, Mengwan extended her hand and brought the hair closer. They stared at each other for quite some time. It ended with Junie's sigh. With a quick movement of his spiritual power, he quickly cleaned himself. He also took the opportunity to give Van Wan a bath. And, being especially considerate, he fixed her fur. Vice, who silently followed behind, blinked in broad daylight. They were doing this. It shouldn't be. Normally, they shouldn't wash properly. And then start enjoying. This new young one really went too far. He was pulling the little rabbit's fur. Does he want to leave her bald? Junie, after touching her enough, put her back in her original spot. Satisfied, he slowly carried her back. Byron had an expression of disbelief. Because that wolf and that little rabbit really look beautiful together. This combination looks rare. Cincy, at this moment, had already taken human form. With long silver hair flowing, bright silver eyes shone intensely. Seeing Cillian's reaction, he could only shake his head in resignation. Forget it. We'd better call Junsi quickly. At least she could have someone to talk to, he said while pointing into the distance. A beam of golden light flew out. Junie seemed to have sensed it. He stopped and turned his head to look over there. Suddenly, he felt a bad premonition in his heart. He always had the feeling that something big was about to happen. When the wolf and the rabbit returned to the small cave, it was getting dark. Junie simply found a corner and lay down to rest. Mengwan was in front of JNQI. Realizing that she wasn't the slightest bit sleepy, she extended her hand and folded her ear to one side, hugging and gently stroking. Inside the wolf pack's palace, a whitish gray, the large wolf was lazily lying on top. Suddenly, a golden ray of light shone from outside. This large wolf slightly lifted his eyelid. For several days, Van Wan had been accompanying Junie in the cave to recover. Until this day, Junie's spiritual energy, his wounds had almost healed. He called Bangwan to come closer. Little rabbit, the herb you need to transform grows in the north, on the far summit of a snow-covered mountain. It's very, very far from here. Did you know this? Van Wan blinked with confused eyes. Such subtle things. With her mental capacity, of course, she couldn't remember. Junie sighed inwardly. It's a long way there. Once winter fully sets in, even I'll have difficulties getting there. So we need to leave soon. I know you understand. right? Junie finished speaking and lowered his head. He rubbed Van Wan's nose. His voice had a slight tone of tenderness. Van Wan Zarayat, her eyes were full of joy, nodded strongly toward Huni. The little furry one smiled. Although this kind might not, there might be no more interactions between them. The little rabbit thought this in her heart, though she knew Junie couldn't hear. Treesk, treesk. Hunzi, hidden in the dark, couldn't help but let out a sigh of admiration. The scene before him was simply too funny. Since Inji passed away, I hadn't seen Junie like this again. I said it. You won't regret it, right? Vice was by his side, with a smile on his face. At that moment, to get this guy out, he had made Junie interact more with this little bunny, creating more interaction between them. Although this guy, Hun Ye, might not. The big meeting wouldn't pay attention to Junie's situation, but one wasn't like the other. Thinking about this. If so, unconsciously, he looked towards the bunny. This bunny knew about the transformation herb. It had already surpassed common rabbits in many ways. Unfortunately, it didn't naturally have spiritual roots, and its constitution was extremely poor. Otherwise, it would be better to take care of it well. After all, there's still a chance to become human. According to what Junie said, this guy, Honey, already wants to collect the transformation herb for his bunny. How much must the other like her? Seems like he really has grown. In his heart, he felt inexplicably pleased. This son hasn't been badly raised by him. These two inappropriate ideas for his age. The bunny didn't even have a clue. Right now, her mind was filled with what Junie had just said. She's finally going to collect the transformation herb. According to what Junie said, it's when he's fully charged that they'll leave. The more the bunny thought, the prettier it became. She had already started considering the luggage she carried on the journey. What are you laughing at, silly? Silly bunny. The bunny suddenly heard Junie's voice. She turned her head and saw. She only saw that Junie had returned at some point. What else does he have in his mouth? He was slowly approaching against the light. Didn't Junie say he was going to look for something? Why did he come back so soon? Yes, they're carrots. At that moment, Van Wan didn't clearly see what Junie had in his mouth. It was just a surprise. Junie brought her carrots. How happy! Bangwan was jumping for joy on the ground. Before Junie could get close, she excitedly leaped towards him. She wanted to kiss Junie as thanks, but the next second she heard a dull sound. Junie in front of her swallowed the whole carrot in one bite. Van Wan quickly stopped. Her whole bunny body froze. You, a wolf, eating carrots. Her bunny face was full of astonishment. Junie let out a soft cry. He didn't quite understand what Van Wan was trying to say. Bunny, what's wrong with you? Van Wani made a puff sound, sitting down on the ground. Junie was somewhat confused. He surrounded Bangwan, preparing to enter. Van Wan grabbed the fur on his leg. No, don't let go. Bunny, what do you mean? Van Woon pointed to her mouth and made gestures. Junie thought she was uncomfortable and couldn't eat. He immediately became nervous. He quickly concentrated his spiritual energy and touched Bangwan's head with his paw. The next second, he heard a loud, internal voice. Why are you eating rabbit food? Also, don't call me Bunny. I have a name. My name is Subangwan. Honey let go of the hand that was touching Van Wan's head. He couldn't help but laugh. This scene made Hong Ye, who was in the dark, very nervous. What's wrong with this kid? Why is he smiling foolishly? Don't you see that my daughter-in-law is scared of him? In fact, Van Wayne was stunned. Junie looked like a clumsy husky. She couldn't help but laugh. She reached out and stroked Junie's nose. Junie immediately understood what she was thinking. He quickly wiped the smile off his face. He grabbed Van Wan's neck, showing his fangs. What are you laughing at? If you keep laughing, I'll eat you. At this moment, he really wanted to slap her. He couldn't bear to look at him. The wolf saying such nonsense. Turns out, it's his own son. However, Van Wan was unexpectedly surprising to him. She had a smile in her eyes. They simply looked into each other's eyes, as if she were looking at something she loved more. Honey couldn't resist being looked at by her. He coughed twice and looked away. And as for the shyness, don't you want to see the rabbit? It's a spiritual herb that can quickly restore spiritual energy. So don't think I'm trying to steal your food. In the last sentence, it was clear that Junie was somewhat agitated. After shouting, he immediately ran off. Leaving behind a large cloud of dust, Van Wan sneezed from the dust that was choking her. When she recovered, Honey had already. He was the size of a black dot. And about the shy one not wanting to see the rabbit, Van Wan softly served. That look of trying to hide something is really adorable. Doesn't look anything like the cruel images described in the novel. What's different here? Thinking about all this, she fell asleep. Meanwhile, it really seemed especially serious, what the young Van Wan had been thinking a moment ago. She didn't hear a word. However, after waiting for quite a while, the person beside her didn't respond. He turned his head to look. Then he saw that he had already put away that chair. He began to prepare himself. What are you doing? I'm gonna help that pup. Otherwise, just relying on this kid, my daughter-in-law? How long will it take to bring her home? At that moment, the wolf and the rabbit didn't know. The road to true love is always full of difficulties. These difficulties come from everywhere, among the multitude of all forms and colors. Sometimes, it could also be someone or an unexpected beast. The second night, Van Wan just opened her eyes in confusion. She didn't have time to react when Honey bit her. He shot toward the forest like a whirlwind. Van Wan, confused, came to her senses and suddenly felt a little scared. The speed they were moving now, compared to when they escaped last time. Is something happening? Junie ran all morning without saying a word. From one forest to another, he stopped in the woods. Van Wan, the bunny, was still dazed. She slowed down for a moment before leaping and throwing herself onto Honey's legs. She opened her mouth and bit that sturdy leg. Why did you bring me here without saying a word? But her little strength for Junie. And it was like just tickling him. Junie, confused, looked down. This little bunny, is she hungry or wants to chew? She's using his leg as a chewing stick. Thinking this, he pulled out a bundle of hay and placed it on the ground. What do you want to chew on? Van Wan was stunned for a moment. After a while, she reacted. The bunny really seemed to want to chew. But why would Junie, a wolf, do this? What is he doing bringing something like hay? It can't be that he did this especially for her. The bunny suddenly felt a little embarrassed. Junie really thought so much about her, but she still hadn't bitten. Junie saw that the bunny was absorbed in looking at the pile of hay. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes. What is this little bunny thinking? A wolf and a rabbit were still worried about the problem of their teeth. Without realizing it, the elders and the respectful were near, spying on each of their movements. Seeing that they stopped, Hun Ye smiled maliciously. He completely changed his skin. Pointing at his foolish son, he began to make gestures. The bluish vice moved his lips several times. This guy really deserves it. He intentionally became the breed he hated most. He flicked his fingers several times before suppressing the urge to act. Here, Honey was still looking into Van Wan's eyes. The next second, his gaze became sharp. Suddenly, a piece of chalk flew quickly toward here. He didn't even have time to react before being thrown. In an instant, milk flowed everywhere. The meat turned over. Honey. What kind of disaster has fallen from the sky? Van Wan hurried to jump in front of him to check his wounds. How are you? Why is this sugar still flowing? Van Wayne was desperate. Those red eyes were already covered by a layer of mist. The silhouette of a giant snake appeared vaguely in the sky. At the same time, the stench also arrived. Again, when Van Wan saw the figure of the giant serpent, he couldn't avoid feeling resentment. Damn, this snake is really annoying. After Junie struggled to get up, he immediately took Bang Wan into his protective sphere. Then he activated the mocking mode toward the giant serpent. However, Van Wan obeyed clearly. This guy stepped back several times with the shin. It was obvious he was already prepared to flee. Hunzi saw this boy, Honey, so concerned about the little bunny. He nodded in satisfaction. It seems his decision was very correct. Thinking this, he faked a cold smile. Seems like you've had enough of that situation with Vice. You better stay there, waiting for your wolfpack leader to come rescue you. Otherwise, what can you achieve? Van Wan looked at Junie with concern. Don't get angry. Otherwise, you'd be falling right into the opponent's trap. Hunsik knows his wolf cub too well. At this moment, he decided to say what he disliked the most. As expected, Junie's furious roar suddenly echoed. A powerful spiritual pressure centered on him expanded continuously around. The large nearby trees simultaneously broke under the echo of his shout. Hunzi had that expression on his face that made people, with just one glance, feel contempt. The space around him seemed to have stopped time. This was the function of spiritual pressure. Within his territory, time stopped. Junie did a calculation in his mind. It couldn't last much longer. Looks like I must leave quickly. The little bunny was completely glued to Honey. She was extremely sad. Her long ears hung limply behind her. Honey licked her several times in a comforting gesture. The bunny, sensing Honey's movements, quickly responded. Seeing the bunny's expression, still frightened, a shadow appeared in Junie's eyes. In the future, he would definitely annihilate this family of mysterious serpents. Seeing Junie quickly fleeing with Van Wan by his side, if he couldn't avoid leaving, this time, you've gone too far. Huggany didn't care when he heard this. He casually moved his sleeve, and the spiritual pressure disappeared. The pressure domain vanished instantly. By the way, this morning, you seemed so desperate to escape. It also has to do with you, right? Hun Ye smiled and regained his composure. That majestic look of the Wolf King? This is called a good deed on my part. Otherwise, this kid would probably stay here longer. Besides, he's still my own son. Our wolf pack won't harm the young. Bai smiled faintly. Ah, to have a father like you. How lucky he is. Here, Junie ran desperately forward with Van Wan. Because his eyes were covered with sugar, he couldn't see the path ahead clearly. When he reached the edge of the cliff, his feet suddenly slipped, and together, Van Wan and he fell rolling. Who can tell him? Why are there things like cliffs in the forest? Van Wan was stunned and fainted. The last moment when Junie lost consciousness, he ran and tightly hugged Van Wan. He only had one thought in his mind. A bunny like this? She'll definitely fall and get hurt. After they disappeared, Vice came out. Does he still want to go with that idea? Hunzi smiled. Now this is the best situation. And if it weren't for this seat, the situation between them wouldn't have happened so quickly. Cinch shook his head resignedly. Better not to see what's coming. I thought it would be very interesting. I wouldn't have told you if I had known before. I don't know how much time has passed. The bunny opened her eyes, confused. She realized it was already dark outside. Because JNQI had protected her very well in his arms, the bunny wasn't hurt. She just felt a little dizzy. It took her a while to react. She immediately jumped in front of JNQI. Trembling, she stretched her paws under JNQI's nose. With both paws, she lifted his eyelids to look. Confirming that JNQI was fine, though unconscious, she sighed deeply. She began to observe this unknown place. Under the calm dark night, an endless meadow stretched. How is it that there isn't even a big tree? Junie's injury hasn't healed yet. Being exposed like this isn't a solution. The bunny started working on nearby ground. She used her hind paws for support. Her front paws quickly dug a hole in front. She lifted the dirt with quick movements toward the back of her tail. Soon, she dug a hole big enough to fit Junie's body. She ate a bit of grass nearby without worrying. Then, with great effort, she pushed Junie inside. After doing everything, the bunny lay flat on the ground. Gently stroking her slightly bloated belly, she breathed deeply. After lying down for a while, she let out a small yawn. She slowly got up and curled up in Junie's embrace. This familiar scent made the bunny feel very calm. Junie, you need to wake up soon. Being alone still scared her a bit. The bunny fell asleep drowsily. The wolf and the bunny embraced in this lonely place, giving warmth to each other. When Honey woke up, there was a warm little thing in his arms. Thinking of that mystical snake he had never seen, Hunkney's eyes filled with shadows. Never in his life had he suffered such humiliation. The feeling of being crushed like this reminded him of his troublesome old man back home. Junie slowly let go of Bang Huan. He gave a few kisses on her little head. The sky outside was still as dark as before. Junie did a little calculation. Had he been asleep for 3 days already? It seems Van Wan had taken care of him these past 3 days. He felt a little happy in his heart. This bunny still cares a lot. That hole is so big. Here, I don't know how far I've strayed from the intended location. Even though the mysterious black snake hurt me, but almost all of them are superficial injuries. He even feels that his spiritual power has increased quite a bit. When Gung Huang woke up, the sky was already clear. Her head had barely emerged from the hole. Suddenly a shadow fell in front of her. She looked up. The slender figure of JNQI under the sunlight looked even more impressive. McWan's eyes immediately froze. In fact, she saw a carrot. JNQI smiled gently. It's for you. Mengwan, excited, jumped forward. The whole bunny was glued to Junie's leg, rubbing with joy. Junie's wolf face silently turned red. All right, eat it quickly. Didn't you say you really liked this? McGuyan's little mouth couldn't help but spit several times. A lot of saliva secreted involuntarily. After eating, she rested for about a quarter of an hour. Mengwan was thrown back onto JNQI's back. A wolf and a bunny set off again. JNQI didn't stop from day to night. Mengwan got tired of looking at the familiar scenery around her. It was nothing but mountains or trees, accompanied by the strong wind in her ears. Her body comfortably settled on JNQI. Her head fell into a deep sleep. From afar, It looked like JNQ. I was wearing a fluffy white hat on his head. Haha, if you look at my son, he's cute. I'm telling you, don't you get bored? Bai looked at the culprit and trembled at the corner of his lips. He had originally planned to return. He didn't expect that JN wouldn't let him go. He insisted on bringing him along for company. He said it wasn't fun seeing him alone. Junsi sat comfortably in the resting chair, looking like he had just woken up. Seeing his own son and daughter-in-law, how could he be bored? However, there was something he didn't say aloud. Once they reached the north, they would surely face many dangers. If he didn't keep going, what if his beloved daughter-in-law got into trouble? Meanwhile, Junie seemed to be unaware of fatigue and kept running forward. They encountered many animals along the way, but all of them were intimidated by the spiritual energy emanating from him. It wasn't until the sun rose again that his speed began to slow down. Van Wakian was at that moment when he finally woke up. He looked around, finding the large road completely unfamiliar. It resembled those ancient official roads. She looked around. Suddenly, Junie dove into the bushes beside him. He raised his head and howled. The bunny was so scared that she trembled completely. Confused, she raised her head and looked around. There's nothing special, right? No black, stinky snake. Hunig didn't answer her question. He howled again to the sky. Many small animals, hearing the sound, began to flee in all directions. After driving the small animals out of this place, Junie softly jumped onto the biggest tree trunk. The bunny just now reacted, right when she heard the wolf's howl. She thought the black snakes had returned, but he just wanted to drive out the usurper here. While Bang Huan thought this, Junie suddenly showed his teeth, making a fierce expression. The bunny protagonist's scalp immediately stood on end. The next second, a striped tiger with sugar spots appeared. A greedy striped tiger entered her field of vision. He immediately saw Bang Huan, who was being cared for by Huni, the chubby and healthy Bang Huan. The radar system in the bunny protagonist's body immediately activated. She sensed the intention of that striped tiger. Instinctively, she wanted to stomp and run away from this place. But her only reason told her it wasn't necessary, because Junie would protect her. The striped tiger's gaze was immediately noticed by him. He turned his head and gently stroked the bunny protagonist in a soothing way. With a very obvious intention to calm, the bunny protagonist's heart gradually settled. Suddenly, the chest of that striped tiger healed. He had already arrived in front of Junie. The wolf quickly turned his head back. The tenderness in his eyes was instantly covered by a cold affection, searching for relatives. His claws glowed with a fierce affection. Suddenly, he healed the chest of that striped tiger. The tiger's body fell with a dull thud. The wolf seemed unsatisfied. He jumped directly and kissed the tiger's body. After the bunny protagonist mentally prepared herself, when she looked up, she saw this scene. Junie tore off a piece of candy and placed it in front of her. This is magical beast meat. It will benefit you to eat it. The bunny protagonist's eyes were filled with disbelief. How does this wolf think? Doesn't he know that rabbits can't eat meat? Seeing that the bunny protagonist still didn't move, Honey could only move forward and push the piece of meat towards her. Junie could only move closer and push the meat towards her. I'm not trying to hurt you. If you eat it, maybe you can improve your skills. Upon hearing this, the bunny protagonist finally understood what he meant. But rabbits are herbivores. She looked at him seriously in the eyes, trying to convey what she wanted to express through her gaze. Unfortunately, they weren't on the same page now. Junie directly grabbed her by the back of the neck, and as soon as she opened her mouth, he shoved the meat inside. The bunny protagonist was shocked, and they shoved a piece of meat in her mouth. Her body was unstable and she fell to the ground on her rear. His fur bristled completely. This is simply the most inedible food in the world. However, the next second, he felt like his teeth were about to break. Instinctively, she wanted to vomit. Unfortunately, the meat was already dissolving as soon as it entered her mouth. Huni looked at her and felt satisfied with her expression. Then he turned around to enjoy his meal in peace. Watching Junie enjoy her food, the red eyes of the protagonist rabbit were filled with displeasure. No matter what, using the fastest climbing speed, like a small projectile, she shot straight to Honey's thigh, opened her mouth, and took a bite. However, the next second, she felt like her teeth were going to break. Boo-goo, my front tooth! Why is this leg so hard? What is the rabbit doing now? She still wants to eat. Honey skillfully made a carrot appear and held it out in front of her. But this time, the protagonist rabbit didn't take it immediately. Vice and JNY, who had been following them, understood it clearly. After feeling like she had become a rabbit, her head felt much more sluggish. Wolf realized the carrot was still there. Annoyed, she hit her head. Protagonist rabbit, rabbit, what's wrong with you? The protagonist rabbit's ears twitched slightly. She slowly raised her head. Her red eyes were covered by a layer of mist. Seeing this, Wolf immediately became stern. Who hurt you? Why are you crying? The protagonist rabbit shook her head. Her large ears moved from side to side with her head. Wolf stared at her, full of confusion. Vice and JNY, who had been following them, understood it clearly. Your child really is too reckless. There is no effect when monsters eat the meat of other monsters. But for common animals like the protagonist rabbit, it's different. Animals are different, right? Jun already shook his head. This guy doesn't resemble me at all back then. How can he care for someone this way? It wasn't as good as when I helped him before. Meanwhile, Junie noticed that Van Wan was barely paying attention. Her heart filled with anxiety. She wasn't even enjoying the meat in her mouth. In front of Honey's concerned gaze, the protagonist rabbit only felt a wave of shame, seeing how much he cared for her while she thought about biting a piece of meat. She calmed her mood little by little. She lifted her gaze, her eyes full of tenderness. Then, she gestured to Junkie lowered his head without hesitation. Van Wan gave her a soft kiss on the cheek. I'm sorry. Although you don't know what I was thinking just now, I still need to say this. Junie knew nothing of her thoughts. Vice, who was hiding in the dark, showed an admiring look. This rabbit seems foolishly adorable, but sometimes she's really smart. After confirming that Ben was much happier, Junie realized that perhaps she had made a mistake. Rabbit, don't you like eating this meat? Upon hearing these words, the light in Ben's eyes intensified. She immediately nodded vigorously. Junie sighed. Then I won't give you these things in the future. He said this while extending his paw over Ben, and giving her a few strong massages on the head. The protagonist rabbit felt a warm current integrating into her body. Her body filled with energy. She was still here, happy. Meanwhile, Junie's expression became increasingly serious. He was lying lazily to one side, digesting. It could affect this little rabbit. He turned around, as if wanting to take revenge, and took what was left, allowing that strength to stay in the rabbit's body. Probably not much time would pass before the rabbit's mind would be corroded. Thinking about this, he suddenly felt a cold sweat. With anger, he turned around and took what was left. His body was torn, and he swallowed everything. After doing so, his mood improved considerably. He was lying lazily to one side, digesting what he had eaten just a moment ago. After finishing the carrot, the rabbit noticed a fishy smell all over her body. She was thinking of calling Honey to accompany her to bathe. Turning around, she saw Junie lying on the ground. His body still emitted a faint green glow. Junie, what happened to you? She immediately jumped towards him. The two front paws held Junie's face. She carefully examined what was happening. Under her worried gaze, the face in front of her changed rapidly. The wolf's fur faded slowly, revealing a pale face. Wow, he's handsome. Van Wan stared at him blankly for a moment. Her face immediately turned red. She immediately covered her eyes. Oh my God, is this also a human? Junie coughed twice and quickly changed clothes. It's okay, rabbit. You can open your eyes now. After hearing these words, Van Wan slowly released her claws. She opened her eyes cautiously. She saw a handsome young man standing in front of her. Junie bent down and picked her up completely, hugging and rubbing her for a while. The protagonist rabbit had a lot of things to ask at this moment. Everything she had experienced today was too incredible. Suddenly, Junie had turned into an adult. Before, being with the wolf in his wolf form felt very comfortable. But now, it felt uncomfortable in every way. The wolf, as always, brought his head closer. With his nose, he gave a small push to the protagonist rabbit. At the same time, he gave a kiss to her fur. His action was as skillful as if he had done it thousands of times. The protagonist rabbit was stunned by this display of affection from the wolf. Her action stopped immediately. This, she really couldn't handle it. Her first reaction was to cover her nose with her paws to prevent her from blowing her nose later. After the intimacy, Hunky was in a very good mood. Thus, holding the protagonist rabbit, he began to practice. The protagonist rabbit was about to jump out of his arms when she saw that the ground was dirty. She quickly withdrew her Yojio. Determined, she found a comfortable position in JNQI's arms. In that posture, she let herself drift into sleep. The next day, JNQI opened his eyes. He saw that the little one was still asleep in his arms. The corners of his lips curved without him realizing it. He didn't intend to wake the protagonist rabbit. He directly took out a magical artifact and headed towards the northern cold region. He thought it would take at least 2 days for the trip. However, due to the sudden increase in his spiritual energy, it turned out that it only took him 1 day and 1 night to reach the northern cold frontier. During this time, the protagonist rabbit woke up once. When she was hungry, JNQI gave her a carrot. When she was thirsty, JNQI gave her water. Cuddled in his warm embrace, she was incredibly comfortable. Before entering the northern cold, JNQI took the trouble to buy a magical outfit to protect himself from the cold. Entering the depths of the frozen north is something that common cultivators cannot endure, let alone this common little rabbit from his home. After getting the things, Junie took Bangwan straight to the north. Along the way, Van Wan witnessed this wonderful scene. Thousands of kilometers of snow. Once they entered the northern territory, Huni didn't fly through the sky. A peaceful and vast land. Nothing could be heard except the sound of snow and the furious wind. Find a temporary place that can protect you from the wind and rain. It is really difficult to find a place that is protected from the snow. Van Waken stealthily peeked out from Junie's arms. She couldn't help but sigh inwardly. They walked until nightfall, when they finally found a small cave. Junie entered, holding Bangwan, and had only taken a few steps. Suddenly, a charming whisper was heard inside. "Who is it?" JNQ, I didn't care at all. He approached slowly. Inside the cave, Qin Yao and Sun Mu were still on guard. When they saw they were from the wolf tribe, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Tin immediately noticed the bunny in JNQI's arms. He let out a surprised shout. "Ah, little bunny, you're still alive." Upon hearing that voice, WN immediately turned pale. JNQI, seeing her reaction, thought she was stiff from not moving for a long time. He massaged her several times with both hands. The movement was somewhat rough. To Tin Yao, this was like abusing a little bunny. "Young wolf, would you sell me this bunny?" WN was enjoying the massage from JNQI. She was still thinking about the wolf master coming in 2 more hours. Upon hearing what the protagonist said, she was speechless. Does this person have a mental problem? Does the protagonist, Maresu, have something wrong with her head? Junie also narrowed her eyes in displeasure. Tian Yao thought the other person wasn't willing, so she quickly said, "I'll pay a little more spiritual stones. How about this? After all, it's just an ordinary bunny. Being able to exchange it for spiritual stones is already quite good." She believes this wolf will definitely sell her the bunny. Junie gave her a cold glance. "Not for sale." Tian Yao's confident smile immediately crumbled. "Why? It's just an ordinary rabbit. You won't get anything by eating it. You should know I have some spiritual herbs and stones here that you'll never see in your life." Van Wassian listened with a serious expression. If she could speak, she would have exploded with insults. Junie's face darkened. "Love is on the rise. Speak, please. Can you answer me a little? You have this bunny for food anyway. You might as well sell it to me." Honey contained her anger. She petted the bunny protagonist's head to comfort her. Then, she took an attacking stance toward Tian Yao. Tian Yao took a few steps back, frightened. "What do you want to do?" Suan Moon had already noticed before Junie moved. He opened his eyes in displeasure. "Friend, that's too much." Junie had a sharp look. "Too much? Wasn't it you who started it?" "Yao Yao just really likes your bunny. She has no bad intentions. But you wanted to kiss her earlier." Tian Yao was surprised when he heard Sun Mu. "This wolf is really annoying. Not for sale, so not for sale. And you still want to kiss her." Then, she whispered through the transmission. "Brother Musi, hurry up and teach him a lesson. Bring the bunny too. And while you're at it, bring the bunny. Being around him is dangerous." Suan Mun didn't respond. He saw clearly. This wolf cares a lot about the bunny. JNQI let out a mocking laugh. "Having such a silly woman nearby. You should consult a doctor for your eyes." After saying that, he glared at the two of them. Then, he slowly retreated toward the entrance with WN. After they left for a while, suddenly, another figure appeared, exiting the cave. JNY looked on disdainfully. He simply came out a little later. He didn't expect to see something so shocking. These two people are too careless. It's really painful to watch. JNQI held WN in his arms for a while. After some time, the snow also began to slow down. At this moment, the bunny protagonist was very excited. Let Junie lower her. One big and one small walked through the snow. The path left a series of footprints. The wolf walked slowly, adjusting to her pace, until a bright flash appeared on the horizon. Only then did they find a cave to take shelter. The ground was somewhat damp. The bunny decided to fall asleep in the wolf's arms. In the following days, the wolf and the bunny continued their intermittent journey. When the snow was heavy, they looked for a place to rest. When the snow stopped, they would start their journey again. I don't know if it's the change in the environment, but the bunny noticed that she was suddenly shedding fur alarmingly. The bunny became restless. Her mood was especially exuberant. This symptom continued for 2 days. The bunny only knew through some instincts left in her blood that her heat was approaching. In her previous life, she had never seen this situation. So now, she was particularly confused. Junie immediately noticed the anomaly in the bunny protagonist. He narrowed his eyes slightly. This is not good. I didn't expect this little bunny to actually be in heat. The bunny protagonist felt as if there were several ants crawling over her. Her consciousness was becoming increasingly blurry. Her red eyes were filled with tears. This heat period is really terrifying. Junie had never encountered this situation before. His gaze held concern. If it were something normal, he would have definitely thrown the bunny out. He would have tossed her among the males. But now, she was his only bunny. Thinking about how the bunny protagonist would be harassed by those males, continuously doing that kind of thing, Junie wanted to devour all the rabbits in the world. He couldn't bear it. He had no choice but to steal a nearby cave to drive away the animals nearby. Then, he dropped the bunny protagonist. The bunny protagonist immediately began running uncontrollably once she touched the ground. And she kept running toward the cave opening. The entrance had already been sealed by the wolf. She could only wander around the cave at night. Yuppie, the bunny protagonist, could only circle aimlessly inside the cave. As expected, she should call that old man Baze to come see. Let this little bunny transform into a human later. But the size difference between the wolf and the rabbit is too large. This idea won't work. Honey discarded one idea after another. In the end, she decided to let things flow. After Junie spread the blanket on the ground, he transformed back into a wolf. He lazily lay on the blanket, watching the bunny protagonist move around uncontrollably. Looking, he suddenly had a thought. It would be great if he were a male bunny. He quickly discarded that absurd idea. The bunny protagonist was restless for about 10 minutes. She lay a bit dejected on the ground. She had accumulated a lot of fat on her body. She grew tired of jumping quickly, but still felt very excited. The bunny protagonist was a little discouraged, lying on the ground. That kind of animal instinct kept shaking her body, urging her to do such things. Her mind was filled with confused thoughts. Suddenly, a loud crash resonated outside. This avalanche really came as a surprise. The bunny protagonist was greatly frightened. What's happening? What's going on? The end of the world. The wolf immediately adopted a defensive posture. He looked back from the cave with piercing eyes. He only saw that the entrance had already been blocked. What a coincidence! Could it be that someone is plotting something? Outside, the one who caused all this, Hunzi, was very satisfied. That way, his silly son could spend more time alone with that bunny. They could be together for a little longer. He is undoubtedly the smartest and most loving father in the world. After doing everything, Hun-ye felt renewed. What follows is nothing interesting. It's been too long since they left this time. He's already starting to miss his home. Hun-ye lazily sat up. Put all your things in the storage space. Then he left peacefully. Don't take a cloud with you. And June, covered by snow below. June and IWNWN were stunned. They didn't know what to do. WNWN's dream disappeared instantly. She raised her head towards Junie. With her little pinky, she pointed at the entrance. Most of the meanings were clear. Hunkui's face was somewhat gloomy. A restriction had been imposed outside. Hearing this, WNWN immediately opened her eyes wide. What's going on? What does it mean that a restriction has been imposed? Has someone been following them all along? That's really terrifying. And we waited until they entered the cave before starting. Doesn't this mean she and Hunkui just? Were all those actions seen? WNWN felt as if she had been struck by a lightning bolt. The shame she had managed to ignore returned in full force. That person who attacked unexpectedly is really disgusting. A big stalker. In just a few seconds, WNWN had used all the vocabulary she learned from Suen. When Junie returned to his palace, he couldn't help but sneeze several times. He was supposed to have cultivated to this point and shouldn't have caught a cold. Hun-ye frowned deeply, shook his sleeves, and showed his arms. His fingers began to move nimbly up and down. Let me calculate. Who is that little villain? The bunny protagonist looked at the dark cave. In her heart, she couldn't help but feel a little scared. Howling, "Wolf, I'm scared." Honey, with skillful movements, embraced the bunny protagonist, and also adjusted his position to make her more comfortable. If it weren't for this restriction, he could leave at any time. But this restriction can only imprison them for 7 days. There was another thing the wolf didn't say. That's the familiar feeling he has with the energy of this restriction. But how is that person here? And moreover, caused an avalanche. Thinking of this, a flash of coldness shone in the wolf's eyes. In fact, the goal of fleeing home was also to free himself from him. He didn't expect the other party to use tracking tactics. Perhaps Junie's embrace is too comfortable. WN soon felt sleepy and began to slowly close her eyes. Looking at the serene face of the bunny while she slept, Honey couldn't help but lean in and kiss WN. The bunny is already starting to go into heat. That means she has grown. As she grows, she can do many things. He really can't wait for the bunny to meet him in human form. Thinking about how, in the future, he would constantly hear the voice of a chattering little girl, he couldn't help but get excited. The next day, not knowing what time it was, WN looked tired. With discouragement, she let out a yawn. She kept rubbing her face, trying to stay a little more awake, not letting herself be carried away by this restlessness. But evidently, the effect was minimal. Junie was a little anxious when he saw her like this. He could only massage her body gently and continuously with both hands. After a while of massaging, the bunny protagonist was surprised. She realized she seemed to be less restless. She happily lifted her head, leaned in, and kissed Junie's nose. JNQI's movement stopped for a moment. His wolf eyes, normally intense, were full of tenderness. It seemed that old man really did something quite good. The bunny protagonist gave him a kiss and seemed not to have had enough, thinking about how many times this wolf had helped her. Seriously, she held the beautiful wolf face of JNQI and gave him many kisses. JNQI, surprised by the kisses, was stunned. What happened to the bunny protagonist today? Why did her heat come on so intensely? After the kisses, the bunny protagonist felt weak, lying straight on the ground. No matter what JNQI said, she didn't move at all. Junkuri looked with a gloomy expression. That bunny appearance made it seem like he had done something to her. Seeing that the bunny protagonist was really tired, Hunkui tilted his head and gave her a kiss. Then, he hugged her and fell asleep on the blanket. In the following days, the bunny protagonist did this every day, sometimes for several hours straight. It had exhausted her all day. If she had gone out, it would have felt like you could see her dark circles. Finally, on a normal day, the bunny protagonist counted the days on her fingers. Earlier, Junkui had also mentioned that this spell could only trap them for 7 days. So today is the 7th.